Okay. So let us start. First of all, I'm Tanya Notarius, and I work here, and I'm very glad to welcome everyone here at our third lecture today, the third lecture of the interdisciplinary colloquium. We called it Souls and Sounds of the City, and this colloquium was launched in the Institute this academic year, and it aims at being a shared ground for researchers, writers, students, and tour guides and other professionals interested in different aspects of the Jerusalem cultural heritage in its near recent context. So in our perspective, in our vision, the colloquium reflects the geographical and also scholarly location of the Institute in the heart of Jerusalem. And it also serves as a kind of first bird promotion of our new one-year certificate program in Jerusalem Studies that actually starts next academic year and will focus on Jerusalem in its different cultural, historical, and linguistics aspects, providing knowledge and skills not only in such fundamental disciplines as archaeology, historical geography, epigraphy, cartography, and others, but also assuring a field work experience within various communities, cities, and individuals. And some presenters who took part in this colloquium, they will be also teaching in this program next academic year. So today it's a great pleasure, a special pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Merav Mack. And Merav received her PhD from Cambridge University, and her dissertation focused on Genoa and Crusade states. She was very active and ran the Jerusalem Institute and led a number of programs that culminated in a series of international conferences and publications. And I believe her real passion are the historical libraries and archives of Jerusalem. And in 2019, Merav published the book, Jerusalem, City of the Book, co-authored with Benny Balint. And in my perspective, this book is indeed unique as research and also as a piece of writing. And it's kind of first attempt, serious attempt to read Jerusalem as a socio-linguistic phenomena and as a scene of philological fieldwork. So today, Merav will concentrating on her project that includes about 300 medieval codices, which were produced in between the years of 10th to 15th century, and we'll talk about what can we learn about Jerusalem, social and intellectual exchanges from its book production in the Middle Ages. So the lecture is about 45 minutes, and then we will have about half an hour for questions and discussions, first in the hall and then with our participants in Zoom. So Merav, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be back in Jerusalem, to be back with so many familiar faces, actually in a room. It hasn't happened to me for quite a long time. I'm also very grateful to Henri Gourina, who is not here today, but maybe joining us from France, and Marvin Esser, who helped, and the whole team here that has been absolutely wonderful. It's nice to see some students with us, and some colleagues and friends who are sitting in the room too. I'm particularly excited because and a little bit nervous, admittedly, because I'm going to present or discuss a project which I have not started yet. I only wrote a proposal for it, starting something new, which I'm hoping that it would lead somewhere interesting. The initial phase of it, and I started with at Mainz University, and I'm very grateful for funding it, for helping me to get it going, and for amazing feedback. Also, you will hopefully be joined at some stage by Gil Shalit, who is the digital humanities mind and great expert who has been escorting me in the proposal, and anyone who may need some advice on how to start projects in the digital world or in the humanities could definitely benefit from that. So straight into it. Jerusalem codices and communities is what I'm going to focus on in the Middle Ages. Now, codices that were produced in Jerusalem have never been systematically collected ever before, and we don't even know how many exist exactly. And when I say that, I thought I was a sort of someone who knew quite a lot about Jerusalem and its manuscripts before, because as Tanya told you, I've been working on it on Jerusalem and in its libraries for quite a few years. But I was surprised. I started working on an exhibition, and that I'm still hoping would take place one day at the new National Library of Israel, but or elsewhere. And when I started collecting just the manuscripts that were written in Jerusalem, I thought, let's focus just on them. And my list grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, hold on, I didn't expect more than a few dozen. And they're not just beautiful ones, but there are many kinds. And I'll show you the details in a minute. But really, from 30 to double to 60 to 100 to 200, now over 300, and the numbers are growing. So even here, when I show you the presentation, it will be not the most updated. I just recently found another 35 manuscripts that were in places that I didn't know about. So, but that's one thing, is to have the codices, to actually collect all those documents, all those manuscripts, and from wherever they are today in the world, and to put them in a list and to know what we have, what was produced in Jerusalem. Taking it one step further, what I'd really like to do is to know more about the communities, to find out about the dynamics of the localized book production in Jerusalem. And that's what stands at the heart of this project. Because the question is, and everyone who lives here know that it's a valid question. So people were writing books one next to the other. Does it mean that they were at all in connection, in contact with each other? Did they know about each other's work? We might be at risk of assuming that because today they are not in touch with each other, that also in the past they were not in touch with each other. And this is a point that I think we need to look at in more detail. And I would argue, I think, that the scholarly discovery and analysis of these manuscripts produced in medieval Jerusalem can teach us a lot about the city's intellectual life. Even if we come up with a conclusion that they were separate, that there was little connection, it's a great discovery about the city. So I hope you'd be joining me in that theory, and we can try to work on it. And when I explain how I would like to approach it. So the preliminary research, which I did at the university, or being part of Mainz University, as I said, discovered about 300 manuscripts, and in more than 10 different languages, which is just great, because we're talking about a real reflection of the city's different communities. When I say Jerusalem, I'm not just looking at the city itself, but everything that is surrounding the city. So I assume that monasteries in the area would be buying their supplies, for example, from the city. So did they use the same parchments? Did they use the same inks? Did they go to the same market to get the support? And did they use a lot? We don't have that many palimpsests. Palimpsests are cases when you delete one layer and you write a new layer on top, but we do have a few of them. So can this manuscript teach us a little bit more about the city and the interaction between the communities? Converts, of course. we may come back to that later. So when I'm talking about the surrounding, it's including also the Judean desert, of course, Mar Saba monastery, Mar Hariton. These are the two most obvious centers for Greek and Georgian, and a few other and Arabic manuscripts, but also, of course, the Holy Cross, where Georgian, Arabic, and Greek manuscripts were written. Let me show you a few of like the whole, starting with in a little bit of a, maybe a boring way, a little bit, but whoops.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's good, yes, there it is. I want to show you the corpus in general. So, as I said, this is not the most updated numbers. Now I have about over 340 something manuscripts. But this is more or less what we have. Is that really showing the correct number of manuscripts? I can tell you now that it's not, because we know much more about Christian manuscripts than we know about Islamic manuscripts that came from Jerusalem. I think that the segment that is going, hopefully, to grow quite a lot eventually would be this Islamic one, because if we manage over the next few years, there are a few big projects that are happening in the world in the digitization of Islamic manuscripts and copying their colophons, and we will eventually find more that came from Jerusalem. Jewish ones. Actually, I think this is a positive and an exciting discovery that we actually have 23 manuscripts from medieval Jerusalem, 28, sorry, manuscripts from medieval Jerusalem, because this is a lot. I mean, Malachi Bet Aryeh thinks it's a very surprising number compared to especially the ones that come from Mamluk Jerusalem from 14th and early 15th century. I think that's a lot compared to everywhere else in the Jewish world. We'll come back to that. Next one. I'm just really giving you an overall reflection to hopefully generate a discussion about how to go about it and how to analyze and where I'm going to focus in those manuscripts when I search for interaction, because I can't study all these manuscripts. There's absolutely no way. I don't have the linguistic skills for studying all those Armenian, Syria, Georgian, Slavic manuscripts that are here. Maybe Polis should just take this whole project and with all your linguistic abilities be able to do it all together. But I'm trying to focus, to say, here we have a group of interesting ones. Let's look at them. Not in this slide, but maybe in the next slide we'll be able to find a few points that would be interesting to look at. And indeed, the next one is period of prolific activity. You see that I'd be very interested in this period. I'm totally not sure about Islamic manuscripts from 12th century Jerusalem. I think that must be a mistake in the catalogues. So I'll need to look it up later. And of course, here you find a few, the largest numbers that we have are 14th, 15th century. I stop at the Ottoman, because with the Ottoman, not because I was just looking just for a date to stop this research, but also mainly because with the Ottomans and with the migration of Jews from Spain, we have everything changes in the world of the book in Jerusalem. So if I wanted to focus to define it in some way, say, right, let's focus from the earliest codices that we have until the Ottoman period. And I think this is probably the more interesting slide when I say, right, let's look at where there may be interesting connection between across languages, across communities, where we might find some interesting understanding. And look at the 10th century again. I mean, that sort of richness in a city that has been destroyed so many times, I find it staggering. And of course, 14th century, where we start having larger numbers. Lenny, yes.
Were you able to introduce sufficient flexibility to include the Aleppo Codex from Tiberius?
So I am really strict on this definition. The reason I only have 300 is because I only take manuscripts that are, it says written in Jerusalem. If it doesn't say written in Jerusalem, it's not in my collection. Even if I have really high suspicion, and not me, but greater experts who say, it was written in Jerusalem, it was certainly written in Marsaba or in the Holy Sepulchre, we can tell because it only has the liturgy of that particular place. But it doesn't say written in Jerusalem. I put it in, I have in my spreadsheet at the moment, I have, when I'm absolutely 100% sure, I put the number 3 in there. If I'm less certain, I put it lower, yes.
When you have Greek Arabic, it means written in Greek, but with Arabic letters?
No, so there are a few that would have translations. So yeah, I'll show this bilingual, and there are a few sort of 2 or more languages. Not as many as I would have hoped for, but
just will keep the questions to the end, okay?
it's fine. Yeah, no, as long as you keep me on schedule, and we'll continue. So this is where I was looking for ideas, and because this is all automatically generated from my spreadsheet, there are probably some mistakes in some of the slides, so you'll have to bear with me. So what, as I said, what I'm looking for is for clusters. That I would be able to look at to be able to say something interesting about what's going on in the city. And the first thing to say about the earliest period is to look for what happened in the 9th century, in 9th, 10th, 11th century. The whole city, I mean, we don't have Islamic manuscripts, unfortunately, still haven't found Muqaddasi Leni. Go fetch one. We haven't got the Islamic ones yet, but we have Christian, we have Jewish ones, and this is the period when they are shifting into Arabic. And it's wonderful, it's just absolutely wonderful to see side by side both Christian and Jewish writers translating the Bible, translating Psalms. There are not many texts where they would do translating of the same text, but Psalm, for example, would be common ground for joint translation. But it's not just the liturgical books. They actually were specifically interested in grammar books. And that makes it even more wonderful because we can actually learn about how Arabic, and again, this is where there are great specialists on the theme of Arabic in this period, have been working on almost every single manuscript of those manuscripts, but usually in separation. So they'd be looking at the Christian Arabic translations, and there are Jewish translation to Arabic by Karaites mostly. And they would, what nobody has done is to look at it in the context of the city, of the place of production. In fact, over the past 20 years, people are so interested in migration of the scribe and the migration of the books that we have sort of lost sight of localized production and what it means to be living in a city in this period of time when such work is done. So this is why I think this is interesting. And let's look at some of the work that was copied. So this manuscript, it's a copy that Stephen Ramler made at the monastery of Mack in 877. And it's found at the British Library today. And he copied the treatise on the veneration of the holy icons by a very important theologian, Bishop of Haran, Theodore Abukura. Theodore Abukura is so much written about him and so little agreement among scholars about exactly where he even lived. Did he live in Masaba or not? Nowadays, I think he didn't, after many years of thinking that he was part of the monastery of Masaba, but that doesn't matter. The fact is that his work is copied for the use of local population in Arabic in the 9th century. In this particular work, he writes that he writes in Arabic. He wrote also in Syriac. He wrote in, his work was translated to Greek. He was really important. And here he says at some stage that he writes in Arabic because it's a clear language that people understand. So the transition into Arabic is being explained, which is something we don't have at all works or very often. But here we actually have it spelled out. He wrote polemic works against Jews, against Muslims, but not the least within Christianity. So defending the holy icons when he was writing it in the 8th century was an important point, which people locally were debating. I mean, was it the right thing to do, to be a Christian and actually adore the icons, and in what way and how to do it? And can you justify it? And it's interesting that it's actually local theologians, John of Damascus, Theodore Abukura, Synecdoche, these were the sort of minds that were very much active in the defense of the holy icons. So how much were they looking at people outside or locally is always a question that comes to mind when you think about this text. Why is it written, but also why is it copied, and who is it copied for, and at what period of time? And when we look at Jerusalem, I don't have anything that is not codices, but I made one exception with this picture from the Dome of the Rock, which is quite famous. This is taken from the surah, the 4th surah of the Quran. It's written all around the Dome of the Rock, and here it's actually, is it not showing? Yeah. Yes. This is it's a part of the 4th surah where it's addressing, the text is addressing clearly the Christian population of Jerusalem. And it says, the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, is only an apostle of God, and his word which he conveyed into Mary, and the spirit proceeding from him. Believe therefore in God and his apostle, and say not 3. It will be better for you. God is only one God. You can see it here. Isa ibn Maryam, that's as much as you can identify in here. But this is very early. I mean, this is exciting. How many Quranic texts do we have from pre the final edition of the Quran? This is a great text that Sidney Griffith has written about, and many other scholars have, and you have probably seen it yourself as well, walking around the old city. And I wrote about it enough in the book, so I'm not going to repeat it, but I think it's one of those texts that are so wonderful because they are really communicating. He's actually communicating with the population that is converting to Islam. And it makes sense to many people when they read this about the Trinity, about the icons, about who is God, what is God, how to think about God. And most importantly, when you shift into Arabic, you make this epistemological change of thinking about God in a different way. And that's what maybe we could say if we start looking at those manuscripts produced here or copied here, and what's interesting and what's written in there in the marginalia, to find out what was interesting for the local population when they were dealing with those questions. The person who copied the manuscripts that you just saw was, as I said, Stephen of Ramle, and we have other manuscripts that he copied. Camille, you're going to spend some time in Sinai with Father Justin, and this is another manuscript that this one, and there is a little bit of palimpsest that he was showing me. This is Gospels that he copied. Also, one of the earliest copies of the Gospels in Arabic that Stephen of Ramle copied. So we can, when I said earlier that I'm only taking manuscripts that are from Jerusalem, ideally, at the end, we will have a map of those manuscripts. So if then we will want to take other manuscripts that we suspect maybe from Jerusalem, we'll have something to compare them against and say, aha, same handwriting. I'll give you an example. This is the, yes, this is the Psalter that I mentioned earlier. This is the bilingual Greek-Arabic Psalter. If I remember correctly, it's the translation into Arabic is not actually from the Greek. So the person who copied the Greek did one side, and then the person who translated to the Arabic did it from Syriac, or a combination of Greek and Syriac. But there are some people who looked at it very closely. But we have a collection of psalters from this period. Not all of them we know from Jerusalem, but all those that are from the region. And this is where scholars would just call them Palestinian. And they all share the same codicological elements. They look the same. They have the, and Timna, I don't know if you've had the chance to look at any of those, but they have the hair side out, the first page. There is the, what's his name? The Russian scholar who studied the Greek ones. He studied all the Greek ones from the 9th century. And he said, but we also have Georgian and we have Arabic ones, and are they the same? You know, open the question for other scholars to come in and just to check if they are, because they're all very small. They all were written for personal use. Were they written for only male users or female users? We don't know anything about female copyists at this period, unlike the time of Saint Jerome when he was here. Copying a manuscript, we know that at the Mount of Olives, Rufinus and the whole team of women were sitting down copying manuscripts. So there was a strong element of, but these manuscripts, I wish I could add them to this, but we have not a single one that survived from 400. But women were users. So. And here, scholars like Vital Hyman, who told me that she's in the audience online, may be of help to us here, because the users of manuscripts read them differently. And which page you touch more, which page was kissed more. You have a lot of wax on some of the manuscript. I'll show you a Gez manuscript later, that it's just so filthy that it's absolutely delicious. You know, it has so much, and you could really see which pages were used more and which were used less. And you can learn a lot about who were the users from just the way they used it, from the footprints, from the leaks, from all the rubbing and the rest. So these are the sort of manuscripts that we have, and I'm going back to what I said about language, because I'm shifting to the Jewish ones, because just a couple, because they're specifically about Hebrew grammar. Two manuscripts dealing with Hebrew grammar, not Arabic grammar, but Hebrew grammar. One written in Arabic, one written in Hebrew letters. So in both trying to explain Jewish grammar, and explaining, this one does it in a very explicit way. So the former one, I'll just say that sorry, I should not be shifting between them because it's troubling it. I'll try again. It's coming. So Abu al-Faraj Harun was a great grammarian, and he's the most famous Jerusalemite grammarian. In fact, in some places, they just call him the grammarian, the Jerusalemite grammarian, sorry, when he was, his manuscript was copied in Spain, and they, instead of his name, they just wrote the Jerusalemite grammarian because they were really admiring his work. But his student, and this is an autograph, I don't have many autographs actually written by, they were mostly copies that we have, but in this case, it's in his handwriting. But his student, who is anonymous, and this manuscript was only recently put together. It actually says that it is the duty of learning Hebrew is a duty of knowing the true meaning of the word of the lawgiver, the sublime. So you cannot, according to this, be a serious theologian, or maybe even a Jewish practitioner, unless you understand Hebrew. That's what the person who wrote this manuscript believes, and here he was writing clearly for a more advanced level student, because he was writing it in Hebrew. And in the text itself, he says, I've learned from my students that this is difficult for them to understand, or that is difficult, and this is becoming more. So he's addressing a more advanced class in this particular book. So this potentially, I'm just highlighting a potentially interesting subject theme within the period of the 9th, 10th century into the 11th century of working on language and grammar. What's missing here, and is very important, is the Georgian element, which is doing exactly the same thing, manuscript copied into Georgian from Greek and from Arabic. And all this translation period of writers sitting right next to each other and translating into different languages, mainly into Arabic, but also to other languages. And the thinking about language. I think that's really interesting period, because there are some periods when people don't think that language matters at all. You just use the language that you know, and that would be enough. I'm moving on to the next cluster. Now, what can be said about 12th century Jerusalem that has not been said already? The manuscripts of Frankish, of the Latin kingdom, were studied by so many different scholars. First of all, because they are amazing. We don't have any other period from which we have so many illuminated manuscripts executed in such a wonderful way, in a serious scriptorium where serious scholars were sitting right next to each other and doing this amazing work. But still, I think we have something to add to here, because when it's done, most of the people who were interested in the manuscripts of Jerusalem were interested in the Latin ones, and they studied them in groups. And those who were interested in the Greek ones studied those in a group. And they said, the Greek ones actually belong to the Palestine, or even the Cypriot in Palestine, and they looked at that in that context. And those who looked at the Latin one looked only at the Latin one. And here I just chose 3 manuscripts, and I'll show them one after the other very briefly, because they are from the year 1136, 1138, and sometime between 1135 and 1138. So 3 manuscripts. This is a Greek one written at Mount Saba. Some of you might ask me to go back to the number of Greek manuscripts and might ask, how come we have so few Greek manuscripts compared to, for example, Armenian, Georgian? The reason is that the Greeks didn't write in their colophons. It's just a matter of tendency that do you do that or you don't do that, and you copy what other people do. And they were less likely to write, I wrote this in Jerusalem. So we have less testimonies. It doesn't mean that we have less manuscripts. Eventually, one day, when science will be able to put it together and say this was definitely from all those parchments have this, I don't know, the DNA, the same, they were exactly the same parchment, and we'll be able to say, yes, it was written in Jerusalem. But this is one of the exceptions where you actually have a dated manuscript that was written in at Mount Saba and decorated at Mount Saba. Another 2 ones, and I'm here presenting, you'll see the famous Melisande Psalter. Maybe Avital will want to say something about it later. As art historians have shown, the Latin manuscripts, but the art is totally not Latin. This is Byzantine style manuscript. This is artists who come from Byzantine and do all the arts in this manuscript. And this is an Armenian artist who decorated this manuscript. So we have joint work of the Latin text with the art that comes from other places. Alongside this, we have, this is undated, and the Melisande Psalter is from, as I said, 1135, 1139. It is by far one of the most beautiful manuscripts, and I'm still hoping that I'll get the opportunity to bring it to Jerusalem, at least for one exhibition, because it has to come here for a visit, just for one. But at several manuscripts written at the same time, just a few blocks away from the Holy Sepulchre, from the scriptorium, we find Syriac manuscripts, decorated, beautiful. Are they using the same colors? Are they using the same similar parchment or entirely different? I think when we start looking at that question, I think it's at least as interesting as other aspects of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem and what it meant to have so many different Christian communities living here, one next to the other, and how they are influenced and develop their skills. So this is why I think it's certainly worthwhile revisiting 12th century Jerusalem and looking at the manuscripts across the divide, possibly as much as possible focusing on the same year to say, yes, are they using how much influence exists between them, and can we learn something about the interaction between the communities in this way? One more page from the wonderful Melisande Psalter, and I wanted to add another, I think it's an important aspect. I'm saying it sincerely because the aspect of gender, as I said, we don't know about writers, copyists, female copyists, but we do know about sponsors, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim in the Middle Ages who sponsored specific manuscripts or entire institutes, and we know of readers. And someone like Queen Millicent, she donated manuscripts to the nunnery that was run by her sister, and where we know that all the nuns were not just had those manuscripts, but were also where they also witnessed a few documents, and so we know they could read and write. And so we have another element to look at, not both as users and as in patrons of art and scholarship in the city. Finally, my third example is the cluster that I've chosen from Mamluk Jerusalem. Just giving you just a general picture of some of the manuscripts that I'm going to show in slightly more detail, but I'm running out of time. So let me first show you this is what my spreadsheet looks like at the moment, and it's only the first few columns and you can't read any of it, but you see how I highlight things that I think may be interesting, where we have years next to Hebrew and more Hebrew and Greek and Arabic. And I think, oh, okay, it's beginning to be interesting to look at those manuscripts right next to each other and see if there are any connection between them, and is any of them dealing with similar topics or not. But ultimately, spreadsheets are totally boring, and it's just lines and lines of text. And so, I mean, look at these three, just to give you a taste of manuscript written at the same time. From the National Library of Israel, we have the Kitab al-Buddha, which is just wonderful. This is what I used in the first page, just as a segment from it for the decoration. In places like in libraries in Britain, they would in the gift shop they would sell you fabrics made of similar, copy this kind of illustrations to give you the sensuality of the manuscript, because this one is just so wonderful. Copied by a great Persian traveler who was in Jerusalem for a period of 6 years. But the same period as we have what is known as the Arabic Vulgate. This is not actually, I said that I'm restricting myself to Jerusalem. I chose that one for the exhibition, and it's rated a little bit lower in my actual corpus because it doesn't say Jerusalem on it. But where could it have been copied? Anyway, this what is known as Arabic Vulgate is what is the canonical text of the Arabic that then everyone would be copying and using as the gospel. So that's when the Arabic gospel becomes more canonical. Next to a very rare case of Quran that has been dated and written, and we know that was written in Jerusalem. We don't have many of those, but again, mainly because the colophons have not all been copied and catalogued. I recently went to the Bibliothèque Nationale and to look at some of the manuscripts. And this is a Gez Gospel that from exactly the same period, same years, and it's I think it's wonderful. Its colors are so different to the others. This green and orange and yellow, and are just fantastic. But tell me what you think about here, because I noticed it only when I lived through it again, and it was written in Jerusalem and then sent over to Ethiopia as a gift. But I think that, what do you think is going on here? I think he's tried to write in Arabic a little bit and kind of like, and include it in it may be Bismillah. but kind of like put it into the decoration. It looks like the decoration in the other page, but maybe someone with a better eye for the Arabic text would tell me if it, and it could have just been done badly, but I think I'm pretty sure that that it is. So it'd be interesting to take a look at it again. I'm going to skip this. I went back to my spreadsheet and I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about other texts, mainly because the Islamic ones I have not looked at enough here, because we don't have enough. But what was very popular, and I find many copies of Mujahideen, this is later period. So when I look at the Mamluk period, going towards the end of the Mamluk period, I have quite a few copies of Mujahideen that were copied in Jerusalem. Mujahideen was a great historian, was a judge who wrote the history of Jerusalem and Hebron, and his book was copied and shortened. And no, I don't have a picture of the manuscript, but a manuscript that was written right at his time was a short, abbreviated version of his manuscript that was written then. So, and I'm sure we'll find more of them. As I said, Muqaddasi we don't have, but of course he was very popular, and what people would have done would they would included in their own manuscripts part of Muqaddasi. So it would not be a copy of Muqaddasi, but it would be their own version of what they learned from it. Still, I'm hoping that we will be able to find a copy of Muqaddasi that was copied in Jerusalem. I don't think that it's possible that it wasn't, because such an influential piece of work would have been copied and would have been copied around here too. Same with the El-Ghazali. We have copies, we just don't have them with a date and a name and a place. How do we go about this? I wanted to show you a little bit of what people use nowadays in the study of manuscripts. There are all sorts of new technologies that allow us to approach, to do some, even for historians with not great analytical skills or and a big lab. You know, when I spoke to the people who are in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they said, "Oh, just bring the manuscript over here. We'll analyze it for you." Try to convince anyone to lend me a manuscript, to take it over to the lab. We're just not going to happen. But there are new ways of doing it, and what scholars are using nowadays is a little microscope that would allow you to even analyze something like, what ink is it? We have three main inks. If it's iron gall, or if it's made of a plant, and they would the two browns would disappear in different wavelengths. And I'm told, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm told that it's very simple to operate. And I asked the Bibliothèque Nationale, I said, yeah, bring it along, we'll do it together. We've been wanting to do it for a long time, told me the person in charge of it. So I think there is some potential to this research, and to have more than just fun analyzing and collecting those documents. How do we find those documents? One of the most wonderful things is that some of them are still in Jerusalem. In fact, about 1/3 of my corpus so far is still here. It's in the Armenian Patriarchate, in the Greek Patriarchate, but also in family collection, in the Buderi, in the Khalidi library. There are not huge numbers, but some of the work was done, and it's here, and we just need to approach them, because you know, I will never be able to do hundreds of manuscripts, certainly not on my own, but I'm not going to do it on my own, let me just make it very clear. But we can approach them, and we can find them, and we can learn a little bit about them when we are here. Where else are they, and where did they travel? This is where I rejoin my former project a little bit on the libraries of Jerusalem. Need basically to follow people like Lenny. People who get those manuscripts and brought them over and created collections. So it would be, whether it's a collection of the famous, or infamous rather, Bishop Uspensky. There you go, come on. So Uspensky, who is known not just for his genuine collection, but also the things that he had stolen from Jerusalem, including a wonderful Psalter. That was the oldest one that we know was written here, from the Greek Orthodox library. I quote in a beautiful poem that he wrote about himself. He said, "I'm like a bee flying around the world and collecting the best and bring it all to my hive. This is what I do. I bring it all to Russia." And another one who did the same thing and brought a lot of manuscripts from all over the region to Russia, to St. Petersburg. And this is Felkovich, again, your mate, from the man of Genizas, who didn't hesitate inventing them when he couldn't find a real one, but also had bought a lot of manuscripts, all the important ones that we have. But make it very clear, everything Jewish that survived is thanks to him actually getting it to St. Petersburg. So all the ones that I have, I think of the 28 manuscripts, Jewish one, I think almost all of them are in St. Petersburg today. But as I said, some of them are still here in Jerusalem. This is just because we have to. The Armenian Patriarchate Manuscript Library is inside the Centaurus. Just wonderful space, and now it even has some electricity, which it didn't have until a couple of years ago, and a digitization machine and more, yeah, and so that's one. This is the Patriarch will be exhibiting some of his great relics in the next immediately after Easter. This procession of the relics that you may be able to watch, and the Greek Orthodox Library, which has just been renovated and now has it always had a wonderful manuscript library, and now it's all renovated and has some light, and this is one of them. And I think I'll end here. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Merav. Thank you. And we have time for questions. So let's start with the question from the audience. Yes.
I was wondering, do we know the breakdown amongst the Jewish texts? Which ones were produced by Karaites, which ones were produced by Rabbinic Jews? Is it at times ambiguous?
It's not ambiguous, it's very clear. We don't have that many, and they've been studied very in great detail. And you can find them on through Ktiv, but even better on what it's called now, the other escapes me suddenly. But I'm sure Sinai, who is in the audience, would be able to tell us some of them. It's not completed, but the National Library is now giving more access to and uploading more information about the codicological information about each one of the manuscripts. So they're not that many. Again, they were studied in the context mainly of, say, creating of the other manuscript of the same author, and trying to produce an academic and analytical volume of it, rather than having interest in the place of production. That has been of less interest to the people who studied it. Lenny, yeah.
There's a few points I want to make that I'm not sure about. Maybe you'll be able to elucidate them. You mentioned that the Mamluk period was the Golden Age of Jerusalem. At the census held by the Ottomans at the beginning of the 16th century, the population of the Holy Land was 123,000. Now, I tried to understand that a few years ago, every morning I would walk in the old city of Jerusalem until I covered all the streets and all the alleyways and all the small cul-de-sacs. And I finally understood that the essence of Jerusalem was not that it's the permanent population, that it's a destination for people seeking spiritual sustenance, I say that tongue in cheek, students and whatever. And the third point is as follows. When I have been researching ancient seals, I saw that there were a lot of inscribed Hebrew seals and inscribed Hebrew amulets inscribed in Palestinian Jewish Aramaic that were found far afield, such as in Spain, in Persia, in Georgia, in Sicily, in Yugoslavia. And then I understood that I managed to see 4 classes of objects that are very mobile, which are coins, seals, amulets, and jewelry. But I think there's a 5th class of object, books.
Yeah.
People didn't have computers in those days, they didn't have telephones, so they took books with them.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, and that's why I said that the study of the migration of manuscripts has gained a lot of interest. And there is a whole group that I worked with for a couple of years that has just been working on pilgrim libraries and what pilgrims took with them. And when they traveled, what did they learn, what manuscripts were available to them. So you're absolutely right. You look at Ethiopian pilgrims who are described carrying manuscripts on their backs like babies, like, you know, putting it, and big ones, because they took great presents. And also, but also at a theological point, I mean, the king in Ethiopia, the emperor, was worried about what was going on in Jerusalem. Are they keeping the 2 Shabbats or not? So he sent instructions and manuscripts. This is, again, Mamluk. So I have many more of those. I have many more manuscripts by far written in Ethiopia and sent to Jerusalem that we know were sent to Jerusalem and could be still here or elsewhere in the world. In Rome, we have loads of them. But this is a different project. We have manuscripts that come with that, you know, people leaving their wills to be sent to Jerusalem, that pilgrims carried because for whatever reason, and left here and wrote in the colophons, you know, I bought this somewhere, carried it with me to Jerusalem, or I ordered it to be copied for Jerusalem. We have a lot of wonderful colophons about those. So you're right, and this is actually really important because it could undermine the whole theory of this project, saying, you know, Jerusalem is a place like many other places that is influenced by its intellectual world, is shaped from the outside just as much as it's shaped inside. But I don't disagree with that, but I still think it's interesting to ask the question, what was produced locally and for whom, in what languages, and what sort of milieu, intellectual milieu was established in this city, and was it at all connected across languages, across religions?
We have a question from Zoom audience. Alida Heyman, would you like to ask a question? Can you unmute yourself? Alida?
I will probably, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see Merav online though. and all of you. Thank you, Merav, for inviting me to make some comments. I would have liked to pose a question whether you are familiar with a certain bishop whose name is like the middle name of your son, namely Bishop Alexander, who actually composed a full library in Ilia Capitolina. And I read about him in a certain later chronicle. I think it was, I can't remember the date of the chronicle. So this would be a question for you, namely the importance, even under Roman rule, of books in Christian, let's say, Byzantine society. Then I would like to ask you about what I term hybrid production. For example, you showed the beautiful sacramentary of the Holy Sepulchre, which we know that was written and maybe also painted by an Armenian who knew Latin, because the squires are written in Armenian, and also other features like the style. And in that regard, I would also like to emphasize the necessity to make the right distinction of what we term Byzantine, because we have mainly art historians, but not only art historians like me, and I had that tendency either, and then an anonymous reader told me, I'm writing about Melisande, I'm working on her art, including the famous Psalter. However, that anonymous reader, when I wrote about Melisande, he said, but why do you say Byzantine? She was half Armenian. And of course, then the Latin component. So and in that regard, we have also, of course, the greatest art historians like Kurt Weitzman, Hugo Buchtal. They certainly distinguished a Jacobite style, an Armenian style, a Syrian style. The 12th century is the period that is termed the Syrian Renaissance. We have also translators, Western translators, who were working, and also so-called scientists like Adaladus of Bath. Antioch was a center, a scientific and intellectual center also of silk production, and other centers. Bethlehem, I think now, because I found a certain document talking about a certain Psalter that arrived in Bethlehem from northern France. So we have a whole spectrum of what I term hybrid production. We also have what is termed the Lettres du Sépulcre. The Lettres du Sépulcre, they were supposed to be the law. And jurists, I mean, historians of Crusader law, they, the matter is in controversy because some believe that the lettres were never made. Some say that they were gone. And I found evidence for their existence. It's only that they were never bound into a codex, because they were writing down the law, the Crusader law, what is called the Assize. And we have all the Codex Juris of the 13th century of the Assize, but we don't have a 12th century manuscript or folios. And I found evidence for the existence of those folios there, and now they never bound it because they were still writing or collecting the laws. it was put in what I called the Ark of the Covenant, the Crusader Ark of the Covenant, within the Holy Sepulchre, and etc. etc. Now I'll stop, and maybe Merav will enlighten my eyes and the rest of us, as your research is so brilliant and amazing, encompassing so many manuscripts and languages. So with great admiration to you, Merav, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Avital. Right, I wrote 3 points that you mentioned. I'll try to just quickly address them. Bishop Alexander, yeah, I wish we had a single book from his library. Wrote a lot about him previously in the previous book, and yeah, no, we don't have a single manuscript, unfortunately. But he was. You know, we know the great libraries of Eusebius, not in Jerusalem, in Caesarea, but in Jerusalem itself, there was certainly his library that was used, and we know that Origen had access to it. It's you're absolutely right. I wish we had anything from that period, from either San Jerome, Rufinus, any of those, and much older Bishop Alexander. So none of that, sadly. 12th century. I see that we also have Anna Goodgart in the audience, so she might be able to enlighten.
She wants to ask a question.
Okay, good. So she'll have something to say about this. I'll leave it to you, Anna. I think hybrid production is a great term. And I think in your article, Vital, you ask, was the East Latin, is a great question and a very fair one, and pushing into saying that let's look at how it was much more complex and richer is a very fair point. Camille might know more about it than anyone else. Yeah, and that's the same to do with Byzantine art. I look forward to your book on Melisande.
Sure. First, I mean, for a proposal, this is pretty impressive, right? We're all engaged and excited, so this is cool. That's the first thing to say. And the second is about that. Where is it going? Are you writing a book? Are you going to make a website and put the database there? How are you going to give people access to the knowledge that you accumulated? And then finally, are there other projects that have happened or are happening now with other cities, looking at similar time periods? And I'm imagining a project beyond this, where you're talking to people, experts on Istanbul, or wherever, Cairo. I mean, it could be any number of cities, but what's 5 years from now when we're interacting about the specific cities? We're talking about Nexus earlier. Yeah. So.
Fantastic questions. Thank you. So yes, database and the book. I had, it's really hard, and I feels really like, am I jumping my guns here by proposing a book proposal? But I did get in touch. I have an offer to send the proposal to Cambridge University Press, that they said, yes, this is the sort of things that they'll be very much interested in, which is, I find very encouraging, because, well, for many good reasons, but there's not enough focus on local production. And I couldn't really find examples. And I thought it would be so easy to find a database where I just copy the structure, the idea, and implement it here. And it doesn't exist. And this is why Gil had to come through and help me redesign the whole thing. What we do have, and you said correctly, Constantinople, there's so many cities that need to have a similar methodological approach. And in my proposal, the fourth element of my proposal is just that, how to think about this project as a methodology rather than as a single project. But the project that at Mainz University, we have two great projects. One is on the people of Mount Athos, and another one is on Constantinople in images and books and the way it was thought about locally and outside. So, but they're much more interested in GIS. They need much more geographical. For me, that's less important. The center of writing are very specific. Jews wrote at home, it's not that main. Even though, you know, tracing copyists or the manuscripts later on, leading it up to modern age, you know, how a manuscript ends up in wherever it is of interest as well. So it would be interesting to collect this data, perhaps for another project. But maybe Gil would want to add something about this. I think I covered those two questions, yes.
Yeah, I have a question related to this, and it's something that I wonder if it has been studied, the history of libraries, of ancient libraries, because this gives you an outlook on what was the scholarship, the possible scholarship of someone who was living beside a library, a specific library. What were the books that that person had at his or her disposal? Because of course it was not so easy to have access to books, and there were many cities where there was only one library. Do you know if there are studies that have been done on the libraries and the books that we know that were present in a specific library during a specific range of time?
Yes, there are wonderful projects. So take, for example, Konrad Hirschler, who is working on Damascus. And he found, and this is something that we have also from other places, when we don't have the actual library, but we might have lists or catalogs of the libraries. So in a place where there is not the physical, but even those lists are just wonderful. Miriam Frankel studied book lists from the Cairo Geniza, and she has over like 130 different book lists, and then you can see who is a readership. You learn about what books are popular, what books are less popular. Here in Jerusalem too, and I actually feel we have a list, again, Mamluk period, early Mamluk, a library, and you know we have over 300 titles in that not very important library. So we know a lot about. And this is almost like the classical way of reconstructing what a thinker, or whether a theologian or a historian, might have had at the available to them, in addition to their own text. So when they copy and just have a quote from something, then that's bingo. You know exactly what text they have. They had a copy of the Bible, fantastic. But sometimes they would make yes, Camille.
Just a very brief question about the confessional approach. I thought my photo found some examples of copies from one community copying a manuscript from another one. For example, Mack, that is a Macedonian question, copying a manuscript from Syrian community that is non-Macedonian community. So, especially in Cairo. So did you find, I know it's a work in progress, but
yeah,
did you find some examples in Jerusalem, such from, I don't know how to say, but from.
So even before that,
or,
yeah.
Yes, or in Jerusalem, is it more specific and copies in one community for the same community?
So the first question, even before you ask about copying for others, we have to ask, was Jerusalem a place of actual production of books for other places? For example, Claudia Rapp, who's been studying Sinai, comes to the conclusion that Sinai was, people were copying for themselves, and they didn't really copy much for other places. However, in Jerusalem, I already have, not many, but I have manuscripts that were ordered from Jerusalem for Sinai. I have several manuscripts like that. As I said, the two Gez manuscripts that I have are both were ordered to be sent over to Ethiopia, compared to hundreds of Gez manuscripts that we still have in Jerusalem today, or that we know were sent to Jerusalem. This is exactly the exception, but it exists. Definitely, we know of Jewish manuscripts. And here, I think, and Avriel Bar-Levav will be able to correct me, first of all, because he might explain why he thinks there were no libraries, Jewish libraries in Jerusalem. But he would definitely be able to explain more about manuscript copied, Karaite manuscript copied for rabbinical use. I think that's mainly in that way, but also backwards, knowing about each other and using each other. The Aleppo Codex, Karaite manuscript used by Maimonides is one example. And it was copied here in Jerusalem. So we do have a copy in St. Petersburg, copied from the Aleppo Codex when it was here. With the Jewish manuscript, I should have added that we are lucky that during the Crusade, you know, that all the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem together with the Muslims, but later on they were allowed to ransom some of their books, and some of them we might have, I mean, they all ended up in Cairo, and from those, if eventually we are able to do a proper mapping of the manuscripts that were written in Jerusalem, and we'd be able to say, aha, this is the same, you know, DNA of the parchment is exactly the same as this one, and therefore this is also from Jerusalem. Yeah, a little bit kind of a little bit unrealistic, but yes.
We have to come to the end of our session, but we have some questions in the question and answer mode. We will send them to you. And Anna Goodgards wanted to say something, to ask question. Yes.
And also Gil.
Yeah, Gil, we'll copy his question.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Merav. Thank you so much. It was absolutely fascinating and such wonderful materials. So thank you so much for that. I was wondering, and perhaps I might be repeating some of what Camila asked. I just didn't hear her question quite good. So apologies in advance for that. But can you say a bit more about manuscripts containing more than one work? Not necessarily in different languages, but say, do you have examples for manuscripts in one language, but where several works are copied together? And what can we say? Can we observe any tendencies in that regard?
Way too early for me to answer that. We have loads of them that are compilations. It was the classical way of keeping manuscripts, was to have them bound together. Sometimes only a few pages are ones that we know were from Jerusalem, and it was put together with other manuscripts that were copied elsewhere, and at some stage they were bound together. Maybe you don't mean that, but this is that happens. I have several examples, or many examples of this kind of manuscripts, but I'm way too early to say about, and also not exactly the topic. As I said, almost each one of those manuscripts deserves its own study. That's the main thing about it. You know, I don't know if you know, the Armenians, luckily I have this is where I'm not proposing that the whole world will be working with me on that, because not everyone is interested in it. But I have a colleague who is interested in Armenian manuscripts, and he's interested in Armenian manuscripts that are in Jerusalem today. And I said, so how many of them were written in Jerusalem? We managed to sort them out and say, okay, so we have a group of nearly 200. Let's take a look at them. Haven't done that yet. Georgians. The Georgians that we have are not the one that here, that would be an addition, but we have a lot that's traveled around the world, and in Tbilisi they already did that study of all those manuscripts to some extent. So we'd be able to compare them and study them alongside the others. So.
So we have also a question from Gil Shalit, and actually there are two questions. The one is, will you be looking at and displaying the paths and the manuscripts made after being written? And then he also wanted to talk a little bit about web application, but I'm not sure we have time for this. So, after the
very good point, Gil. We will, I think, because it's easy, we'll add the information, and it's not part of my project, but I'm sure it would be interesting for other people to either write papers about it or take it on, because you're right, this is how we know about the impact of, or partially impact of manuscripts outside their place of production. So, but it's not the core of the project.
Okay. The question from Nadia Vidal, thank you very much for the talk. Can you please talk a little bit about the 28 Jewish manuscripts? Are they all Karaites produced in the Karaite House of Study in Jerusalem, or are there others too?
There are some wonderful manuscripts in there. I could dig them out. No, I can't, because I'll have to change into my actual spreadsheet. Malachi Bet Aryeh wrote a tiny little article, annoyingly too short, article about manuscript production in Jerusalem and before the Ottoman period. And he focused only on the rabbinical one, because he said that like 30 years before, someone did all the work on the Karaite one, and those two articles are just totally not enough. It all needs to be done, redone, and expanded. And now, thanks to the work that they have been doing over the past few years, the numbers are growing, and so we will have to be all revisited. If I'm happy to share, if someone has some interest, I will be able to share the data that I have and go through it. I didn't talk about medical treatises. I didn't talk about, someone asked earlier. I mean, it wasn't a manuscript that has a Jewish manuscript with Greek philosophy. But it was not written here, it was just copied here. So what's interesting is that there was a copy of the manuscript here, and someone thought this is interesting enough to copy again and make it available to more people. So does it mean that everyone was interested in Aristo in the Jewish community in the 14th century? I don't think so, but it's interesting that, and because we have the manuscript, unlike those, unlike the book lists, we can actually look at them and say, "Ooh, very popular book, loads of people touch it, a comment on it, or whatever other things they might have done with it." Or sometimes you have just a beautiful Yefet Ben Ali. We have a lot of copies of Yefet Ben Ali, because, you know, the great, this is translation, full translation with exegesis of almost all the books of the Jewish Bible, and it was very popular and copied by many people, and not all of the copies have the place and date.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's very exciting, and maybe I'm sure there's still more questions and comments and reactions, but actually the time of this session is over. So we can continue just talking a little bit with some small refreshment outside. And thank you very much for all the Zoom participants. All the questions that you asked have been collected. We'll send them to Merav, and she can be in touch with you personally.
Absolutely.
And of course, we are also welcome to be in touch with Merav. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to Merav.